Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi şrah li sadri ve yessir li emri ve hlul ukdeden min lisani yefkahu kavli. Selamünaleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuhu. Inshallah, we will continue with our discussions on the purpose of Quran, purpose of scripture, how to read scripture. And we started our journey when it came to our discussion came to the story of Adam alayhi salam, and there were some let's say disagreements there. So we said maybe we should start studying the purpose of Quran and so on. And last week we discussed the limitlessness of Quran not having any limit, any boundary, and this applies to everything, time, space, and so on, context. It means it would be mistaken to say that you get an ayah in Quran and you say the meaning of this ayah is this, and period. If you approach Quran in this way, it means you are putting a boundary there. You say this sentence, whatever I'm reading there, is not any different than any other sentence in any other book in terms of, how you read it. Right? You read it, you get a meaning, or most of the time we don't get any meaning. Some other people get some meaning. And then we say, okay, that's the meaning of the Quran. And we put the di at the beginning of the meaning, so it becomes the meaning of Quran. And so last week we studied how this is not a proper way to approach Quran. And Brother Yusuf, he explained some discussions around whether Quran was created or not. And while at first it sounds like, it's how it is relevant to our discussion, and we realized that because Quran is not created, it is the speech of God. It's coming from the absolute source. It means every time you interact with it, it's coming from the source that creates you in this very specific moment. So it speaks to you in this very specific moment. The meaning is not bounded by space, not bounded by time, and so on. So when Mufassir comes with a meaning of Quran, it is a meaning of Quran. It might be true, and it might be the case that it's the meaning that I need. So if it makes sense, so I should follow it, and so on. But the time change, the people change. It means what we understand from Quran, not Quran itself, but what we understand from Quran will also change with us. Okay? And we said this, then some people ask a question which is very, I would say, natural. And now we have it in our chat. Thank you, Zarar, for reminding us. The question was in layman's term, like, if this is the case, if, I read Quran, or somebody, let's not say I read, let's say a really well-versed, established scholar. Okay? Let's say, let's use a name that almost everybody, let's say, agree upon, the Imam Ghazali. Okay? Imam Ghazali reads the Quran, and writes a tafsir, comes with an understanding and so on. And when we read it, we see that it is coming from a person, a human being, a limited human being. And he is interpreting Quran based on the narrations and so on and so forth, but within his own filter, right? And this is understandable. Everyone would do the same thing. That's the reason when we read one scholar versus another scholar, the interpretation does not match 100%, right? So the question was, if the Quran is at the mercy of the scholar's interpretation, and let's not call it as my interpretation, but let's say Imam Ghazali's interpretation. If this is the case, if the interpretation would change between Imam Ghazali versus Imam Rabbani versus Imam Ali, right? Even between the Sahaba. The Tuesday discussion, and Najm, Surah Najm, we're discussing. Ibn Abbas says, when it says the Allamahu, the Shadidul Quwa, it's talk about Jibril alayhi salam says Imam Aisha. Imam Aisha says it's about Jibril alayhi salam. Ibn Abbas says, no, it's about God, right? So if it is at the mercy of the scholars or Sahabas and so on interpretation, that's the question, then their understanding, then how, if it's at the mercy of their understanding, how can it be mizan, how it can be furqan? Like, how am I going to rely on it? Like, if it's not fixed, right? That's the idea. How am I going to separate right from wrong? Imam Ghazali says one thing, Imam Rabbani says another thing, Imam Nursi says one thing, Imam something else says another thing. Not necessarily they contradict and so on and so forth, but they say, different things. And we're not discussing here a fiqh perspective. Like, we're not saying that whether they agree on like fundamentals of the religion or not. That's not the point. You read an ayah, and what does ayah mean? That's the question, right? We read An-Najm, one Sahaba narrates one thing, another Sahaba narrates another thing. How am I going to say that then the Quran is Furqan and even Mubin? I mean, if it is so clear, why all these, the interpretations and so on are changing? And if I cannot definitely choose between two contradictory interpretations, again, let's, make it more practical. Let's say they are not contradictory. Most of the, the interpretations we read, they are not contradictory. Let's be honest. Like, there are contradictory interpretations and so on, but most of the scholars, at least, the agreed upon set of scholars, we don't see much, let's say, contradiction. If we are talking about political implementation of the things, whether can you kill a kafir or not, we're not talking about this, okay? This is about people. This is not about interpretations. I never seen any, established scholars saying that, oh yeah, if you see a kafir while you're walking, just take your knife and then kill him or kill her. I never heard that. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing. But we're not, interested in this. I apologize for my frankness, but the crazy people's, the implementations and so on. That's not the point. If I cannot definitely choose between two interpretations of Quran, then how was it sent to judge in truth between people concerning that in which they differed? Right? This is ayah from Quran. Quran defines itself, and we sent down Quran to people so that it would become a judge between people in which they do not agree and so on and so forth. Right? There are such. How this is the case? The question. Let's start from there. Let's not take this question as, a question that needs to be answered because it's somewhere there on the website and so on, or a friend asked me. So take this question, make it to relevant to you. If you have a similar question in mind, which is relevant to you, relevant to that question, answer that instead. Okay? Let's not try to make it an intellectual discourse. Oh, there's such a question in the literature. Let's try to answer. That is not our business. If the question is relevant to you, or if you have a version of it which is relevant to you, let's study that one. Who wants to start? Do you have the microphone? Oh, then you have to start. I apologize.
So, I feel like the question here is, well, the question is clear, but maybe before trying to answer the question, let's ask another question. What is the assumption behind this question? Why the asker, in this case, Zarar, is asking this question? Where does this question come from? Today, after the discussion at Drexel, the student was asking about like God created man for what? And then he gave the answer saying, for us to worship. And then he says, why? Why does God need my worship? So that question has an assumption that God would need something so that he would ask. So the assumption was wrong. So this is why there's no point of trying to give an answer to that question as itself. So in the case here, what is the asker is assuming. So let me bounce back the question and leave it there. What is the basic assumption that makes us ask that question?
Which one? If Quran is at the mercy of the scholar's interpretation, if every scholar is interpreting it slightly or significantly different, then how it is a reference point? Because for a reference point, you expect it to be fixed. How it is a reference point then that I can rely and I know that what is right and what is wrong?
Yeah, just for 1 kilogram, they say that there exists some 1 kilogram in some museum or something, which is taken as a reference point for the rest of the world to take as when they make their 1 kilogram. So for interpretation, where is that? Is the question. If it is not there, then how is Quran being a distinguish or right from wrong? This is the question that's being asked. But what is the assumption in there?
And so he gives an example which will help you with the assumption. He says, just an example, translating inna mutawaffika. So he wrote in a transliteration. Jesus was raised up. So mutawaffika means raised up. I don't know. It's transliteration. So okay, so yeah, okay. Let me read the how it continues. One's translation is Jesus was raised up, implying he is still alive and hence he will come back. Versus another translation, he was given that, implying he's not coming back. Both cannot be true. Some scholars translated this ayah about Jesus as he was raised up. The same, they took the same word and translated it as raised up. And then other scholars translated it as he was given death. That's what you said, right? Yeah. And and then he adds some other implications according to himself, maybe, or maybe the scholar said he was raised up. That means he will come back. He's still alive. The other translation says no, he was given that. No, it's that he's not coming back. So it says both cannot true. Which one I'm going to believe? So that's the question. It seems no opinion. Okay, let's start from. No, I would say let's start from beginning, which means yeah.
The full circle.
No, I said no, I meant like a conceptually and chronologically. Start from the beginning, how we read Quran, why we read Quran, so that you get such an implications and so on.
So let's go through the creation story. Hazrat Adam. So then, yes, when and correct me if I go wrong, because this is a sensitive topic, and I'm not sure if I will be able to make justice to the topic, but when I see a flower over there, if I am in a good mood today, I would say, oh, look at how nice and beautiful the flower is in there. But if I am upset today, I would say, oh, look, the head of the flower had dried, as if it was also sad. It's just tilted. If you were to listen to me in both cases, probably you would agree with me, because it's a lovely, beautiful flower. You can get excited by looking at this dried flower over there. But if I am sad and I observe it with sadness, still, you would agree with me, probably, saying that, oh, I see where you're coming from. So whatever I observe and I conclude would be my interpretation. So there is no escape from that. Like something comes in, I interpret it and I reflect it out. I do not create anything. So think of it like you have this mirror over there, and a nice picture is being reflected on that mirror. So whatever comes out of the mirror, if it's a little distorted, it might get elongated. Some parts of the reflection might be a little fuzzy, depending on how clean, how flat the mirror is. If the mirror is totally black, nothing will reflect from the mirror. This doesn't damage the source, but this means that it's a mirror and it's reflecting. So I should know that. When I'm getting before a mirror, I should know that I'm going to see a reflection of the reality, and this is going to be limited within the capacity of that mirror. Qur'an is speech of the Creator, and it is being reflected to different mirrors. Prophet has been a mirror. Imam Ghazali has been a mirror. Atik is a mirror. And I am also another mirror. My understanding is what reflects on me from Quran. So I think a more relevant question in this case would be, which reflection is more worthy to be taken as a reference? Because all of these are reflection, including prophet's understanding, or how I get to observe Quran through prophet, is a reflection, is an interpretation. So there is no escape from taking all these as interpretations. None of them is Quran, like speech of God. They are created, limited reflections of that divine speech, that infinite divine speech. So this is why the expectation was in the question. The expectation was that there's going to be a pure understanding that I can pinpoint. But that's contradicting the initial definition of Quran as we have been talking about it. A more relevant question then becomes, since we are within now the realm of interpretations, potential many interpretations, which interpretation of Quran is depicting it as distinguisher of right from wrong? That would be a more relevant question, if that makes sense.
What do you mean by distinction, right? Like,
Furqan. So, okay. So Furqan. So this was the initial questions I was asking. Since it's Furqan, it's going to distinguish right from wrong. But if itself is not fixed, how am I going to take it as a reference? Was the question, which was boiling down to, if it is Qur'an, the expectation was that it has to be fixed, so that if I'm under some harsh condition and whatnot, I will open the book, I will take the meter as if like it's a fixed meter. I will put it and I will say, okay, this is A, this is B, I'm going to go with B. It's clear. But now the conversation is boiling down to a point that it's interpretation, and interpretation is individual, to really boil down to what that individual is at this moment. Then this imaginary fixedness disappears. This is why that worldview is sort of now starting to collapse, which means, oh, then is Quran not Furqan would become an issue. Even if it is Furqan, how am I going to benefit from it becomes an issue. So this is where the question is. Does this question make sense? It's not clear there. Okay, well, what is not clear?
I'm not sure why we're assuming that right and wrong will change with time. Like what was wrong at some point will always, I mean, yeah, will always be wrong, no? Like,
Is drinking water good or bad? It depends.
uh,
drink too much. No, but it depends.
I don't think that's relevant for the Quran, no? You don't need Quran to tell you that though, do you?
No, it's just like when we say right and wrong, what we mean with right and wrong, sometimes too primitive. Let me put it that way.
Right.
So to give you an example, let's say I'm teaching my daughter in a few years, inshallah, let's say geometry. And I tell her that if you have a triangle, right? If you sum up the angles, it is always what?
180.
180, right? And I teach this to my students. It is always 180. Is this a true statement? True statement for her. When she starts the graduate school, when she starts learning Riemannian geometry, for instance, she learns that, oh, in some cases, the angles of the triangle can sum up to bigger than 180. So, which one is true? The first one was true. Within her context, within the purpose of what we were doing and so on, it was true. Because in her life, she would be always within this Euclidean geometry, whatever. The details doesn't matter, right? It was true for her. And it will be true for her entire life within this context. But if she is looking at the thing from another perspective, then she would say, oh, actually it is true in such and such cases. So just as an example, Quran says you cannot kill another human being. Quran says kill those people. Which one is true? Both. One is true in certain context, another is true is another context. So these are just basic examples, right? What is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is not true. It depends on the purpose. It depends on the context. And this is true with everything in life. So when it comes to, again, Zarar says a more relevant example, and then he says, Ghulam Ahmed Mirza Qadiani. Very relevant. Alhamdulillah.
Who?
Claimed prophethood. He comes with his own interpretation of the Quran. Now, is he a prophet or not? Should I believe in him? He interprets the words of the seal of the prophethood very differently. This is Ahmadi, right?
Oh,
So, again, Zarar, I know you are politically very charged and you want to get answers to these questions. I respect that. Inshallah, we will come to there. But let's start with, simpler examples, not such, yes, politically charged examples, but they are good examples. Alhamdulillah, we will come to there, inshallah. But, okay. So, let's wait for Azam because I cannot concentrate. Sorry. No. Okay, going back, we discussed several weeks ago what you understand from anything, any statement, changes based on who said that, to whom it was said, in what context it was said, right? And so on and so forth. All these different things. And it doesn't mean one meaning is right, the other meaning is wrong. Depending on the purpose, addressee, the context, and so on, the meaning will change. This is the reality of, every human communication, every human, let's say, understanding, thinking. So being afraid of this, it means you're denying yourself. This is how human beings think, how human beings understand. Yusuf tells me one thing, I understand something. You say, and the same thing, I understand another thing. Because the person who's saying is changing, right? We see this in narrations of the Prophet as well. In most of the narrations, Prophet says God is out of space and time and so on. You cannot pinpoint the God. And then in another narration, he asks slaves, and slave says God is there. And he says, Alhamdulillah, inshallah, this knowledge will take you to Jannah. What am I going to do with this? Right? So it's changing. What is meant there is changing based on the person that he was speaking to. Within the capacity of that slave, the highest point, the highest horizon that the slave could reach was that. And he reached that point, and Prophet was praising him for that reason. But when I read the narration, I don't say that, whatever Prophet said has to be true, so God has to be in the skies. I don't say that, right? Why? This narration is there, it's Arabic, it's written, the God is in the sky and Prophet praises slave. What am I going to do with this? I don't have any difficulty, right? I say whatever meant is based on the context, the person. Have you heard the narration, one of the Sahabis, Omar, saying that when Prophet speaks to Abu Bakr, I don't understand what they are talking about. He speaks to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu in a way that he would understand, he would benefit, which sometimes wouldn't make sense to another Sahaba. It doesn't mean that he's changing the truth, right? But the idea is, we said that, right? The point, the reason we are living in this earth is to get trained. And how you train this gentleman is different than how you train this gentleman. The truth is not changing, but how you represent it to this boy is different than how you represent it to his father. And it's not only about the capacity of people. Even if you have another person at the same capacity with Yusuf, for instance, Bushra, same, the mental capacity, I would still narrate it in different ways, even if they have the same capacity. What Yusuf needs to be trained would be different than what, let's say, the Einstein, they are same capacity now. I'm just, making it. What Einstein would need, right? Although they are at the same capacity, I would use this different language, different words, and so on, if I'm a good teacher, right? If I'm using the same sentences again and again to everybody, I'm not a good teacher. And because my prophet is best of the teachers, I would expect that he would explain the same phenomenon depending on where I am in my journey in a different way than someone else at another point in his journey or her journey. Or what he says to me today would be different what he says to me tomorrow. Not because he's changing his mind, because he's the best of teachers. Best of teachers. So he would know what I need and speak accordingly. If this is the case with the prophet, can you imagine what happens with the creator, the absolute creator? Whatever I need is given to me as a truth. Okay? So that's the reason I said, like, our understanding of truth, right, wrong, and so on, sometimes can be a little bit primitive. And it's not like it is, ironically, most of the time, because we are educated. Through our education system, we are taught there's an objective reality out there which is independent of your, the experiences and so on and so forth, which we call it, I don't know, physics or whatever, which is not true. There's no such life. What I see is different than what this gentleman sees every time. So truth, this is truth, right? Like, are we clear with that, or is there any objections maybe or questions?
As you talked about training, I'd like to open up something that we've discussed in the past about whether or not I expect God to speak to me. And I think I'll talk about myself. I think, I make that mistake. I'm like, okay, I already see the Quran, and the Quran is the speech of the God. So because it's already there, then the conclusion is that, I should expect him to speak instead of actually questioning, do I expect him to speak to me? And I honestly don't think I expect God to speak to me. I think if I am made with purpose, then I expect the one who made me to tell me what that purpose is. That can come in the form of speech, in whatever way. I expect to learn or be able to find or have whatever way, but I want to be told why I'm here. And I think when I think of the Quran also from that frame of view, then it doesn't really have to be speaking to me. It has to be teaching me. And because you were talking about training, I don't know if it's necessary, if Allah speaking to me is a necessary part of my training. So I would like to hear some thoughts of that.
Can you clarify how you distinguish, like when you say, I don't expect him to speak to me, but teach me, what is the distinction?
So, for example, when we read Prophet Yunus's story, right? One aspect of it could be, Allah is talking to me in this, and he is telling me this.
Or another aspect could be Allah is talking to the Quraysh in this, or the Prophet in this, whoever the addressee is. And Allah makes it very clear in the Quran also at many points who he's talking to. Ya ayyuhallazina, or you believers, for wives of the Prophet, so he specifies the addressee. And then I could read it like that, like he's talking to them. And even there, I can learn so many things. There's so much to learn even then. So is it necessary for me to feel like, God is talking to me, for me to get trained through the Quran? Is the Quran relevant to me or relevant for me? That's my question.
This reminded me my example again. Like, did my daughter needed to know that in some cases the triangles can be more than the 180? Answer is no. I mean, if she's okay with that, the initial knowledge. So you open the Quran and you say that I will read it as it's speaking to wives of the Prophet, it's speaking to Bani Israel, it is speaking to this person and that person. You open the Quran and sit in front of it, and it will teach you. If this is the definition of Quran for you, it will teach you within these definition, within this context. And inshallah, you will get your best within this context. So going back to the beginning and our discussions, it always boils down, and that's the thing we should be understanding. It always boils down how we define Quran, what we expect from Quran. If we define Quran one way, it will speak us in that way. If we define Quran is another way, it will speak us in that way. So it will depend on your definition. If you open your Quran and say that I will read the Quran only to learn some rules, then you will learn some rules, and they will be probably, let's say, true within your context.
But I also just don't think it's that narrow, like it's not like when you consider first addressees, you're closing yourself off to, meaning for yourself. God at so many points is talking about the believers. And if I do, think of it like, oh, God is talking to Bani Israel over here, I can still do that same thinking that we were doing before, where we were like, okay, but do I have this attitude? Instead of straight up being like, oh, my understanding is God is talking about attitudes here. Is it not okay to be like, God is talking to those people, but from their attitudes, I can also learn and I can question whether I have those attitudes? My question is, and of course, have I learned a lot from, the like interpreting Quran as it is coming to me? 100%, yes. And I do think, like I love symbolism, I love all of that. But my question comes down to, is it okay to do that? Is the Quran telling me that it's okay to do that? Was the Prophet doing that? Were the companions doing that? Because, like, is the Quran supposed to be interpreted or read or understood within certain rules? Is there a framework for understanding the Quran, or is it just open to all? That's my question.
It's not related to this. It was about the objective truth that you were saying, and I feel like there should be like a line. I don't know if you would draw a line or something like that, because the way you were describing, it's like everyone can taste this tea. Someone can have a different experience and they can share that different experience, but no one can deny this is tea. But like the way and that is for me is like an objective truth, and then you can extrapolate on that. And that is how I view the Quran to be, or like how I view the book to be. But how I'm understanding is like it is clearly up to the interpretation of the person. So I'm asking is like, are there some boundaries that we cannot cross? Like, is there something like that? And it's like if you're going on by that, like some people have different like life experiences. They just have like they have life rough or they don't like life or anything at all. They could interpret it very differently. So is there a fine line that we need to draw that okay, your interpretation can go as far as here. After this, it's not like a correct way about anything, like not Quran, but
And who will tell us what those boundaries?
Who, for online participants, she's also saying that, and who will tell us what these boundaries are? That was the question. So with your example, everybody would agree that this is tea. One thing, everybody would agree that this is water with some leaves and so on. But Atik would say this is not tea. This is, just a failed attempt of tea, he would say. If you want to drink tea, here is tea, he would say, right? So people would agree upon something, which is, let's say it's chemical constitution. Same way, people would agree when they see an alif in Quran, it is an alif. When they read inna in Quran, everybody says this is inna. When they read Bani Israel, everybody agrees that it is be, noon, and so on written there. With the analogy, the example, this is the analogy. So that's much you can, 100% agree upon with something. That's the level. Beyond that, the conceptual understandings and so on and so forth will come. Just like in your tea example. Beyond saying that this is water, some leaves boiled at that degree, that everybody would agree. The rest, I think, wouldn't agree with you. Just like when you open the Quran, the alif, ra, noon, whatever, everybody would agree, and that's the level. Going back to the boundary and how we read it too. So probably because we are discussing this topic maybe by itself, it sounds a little bit, let's say, complicated and so on. Quran does not come to us on the mountain, like it was not revealed on the mountain, right? Quran comes to us through prophet. And today it comes to us through students of a prophet, right? This is the way we accept it. At least we take it this way, read it this way, and it makes sense. We say, okay, I'm the believer. So we shouldn't forget that. Like we shouldn't take Quran as yet another book out there and we're just trying to read and understand. This is not the reality. Nobody in this room, I assume, with the first encounter with the Quran was, it was a book on shelf, and he said, oh, wait a second, what is this? Let me open it. There's no such reality, right? Even with the unbelievers and so on and so forth, somebody hands the Quran to them and sometimes read with them and or share an ayah. So there is always this human factor there. So it comes in the mouth of prophet. And then it comes in the actions of the prophet. So the words of the prophet, the actions of the prophet, sometimes silence of the prophet, right, interprets it. And this is how we read it. So that's the one initial boundary that we have. Even if we want, we cannot go, outside that. So I think for everybody, it is clear that it's bounded by the prophet's interpretation. The second thing, going back to your question, can't I benefit from it if I read it in different ways and so on and so forth? So let's look at the practical answer in front of us. Throughout the history, scholars took it and interpreted in different ways. The method, I'm not talking about the actual interpretation, the text, what they come up with. I'm talking about the approach, the methodology. Some of them took it as a historical text. They said this is a historical text. It tells us the historical facts, what happened at what time, and so on and so forth. And they interpret it this way. Did it work for that people? The people around them and so on, they benefited it. They needed it. They benefited in this way. Some other scholars took it and say that the Quran is the book of rulings. We will use it to derive do's and don'ts. Right? They read it this way. They come up with the rules they were after, and they came up with some rules. Did they benefit from it? They needed it, right? And they benefited it. It was what was needed by them, training again. Some other scholars said, oh, no, you should just read it as as you said, talking about some stories about other people and so on, but do your best to get some lesson out of it. This is how you should be reading Quran, they said. Did it work? For that people, it worked. May Allah accept their effort. May Allah accept them to His Jannah. It worked. So the question is now, within your time, within your context, within your life, if you take Quran as a historical book, does it work? If it works, it works. Like, who am I to tell you that, no, it doesn't work? You will go to Jahannam. There's no point. If it works for you, that's great. If you take Quran and say that I will use it to get some rulings, the question is, does it work for you? Does it keep you on the path? When you have a problem with your mother, you go to work. When you have people around you in this society talking about all these different ideologies and so on, people denying religion altogether and so on, reading Quran in this way, does it work for you? That's the question. If it works, it works. So, question is not and never shouldn't be how Zarin will read Quran. It's Zarin's problem. I asked the question, how am I going to read Quran so that it will keep me on the right path? If we approach Quran as an academic, like Zarar does sometimes, right? Zarar. And say that, okay, well, I should find the best way to read Quran, and so that I can impose this reading to everybody else because, I have this military power as well. Right? It won't work. The question is, how am I going to read it so that I'm going to benefit from it? Because it's your life at stake. What Quran says, when you end up with Jahannam, the Nar, you will say, oh, but I was following this, I was following that. And they would say, we didn't force you. Right? You are by yourself at that point. So you go to grave yourself. So you have to answer this question, is it working for me? Is it keeping me on the path? Does it illuminate my grave when I read it this way? That's the question. So I speak too much. You speak a little bit more. So let's hear from others, and then, yeah.
I just have a question. So why can the Quran be all of that? Because like some ayats are just ahkam. Like if I read the ayah, إنما حرم عليكم الميتة والدم ولحم الخنزير. What else can I take from that other than blood and what is it called? Dead animals and swine are forbidden for you. What else should I take from this ayah other than a pig, pork? Like some ayats are just ahkam. Like when do I have to start my fast and when do I have to break my fast? It's an ayah in the Quran, right? When like so why should I like they that's so of course yeah, of course they interpret it differently, but they interpreted just, the time, but the ayah still talks about when you have to start your fast and when you have to break it. They didn't, they didn't differ of like, I don't know, they didn't give some completely different interpretation. That's my point. Allah, I'm not saying because we know that the Quran is not only ahkam, like part of it is ahkam. Like some ayats are very clear, or the ayats that talks about the mirath, like how much is for the girl, how much for the boy, how much for the whatever. What else would I interpret these other than it's about the inheritance, So why should I not invent, but like, assume that there's some other meaning hidden behind these ayahs other than what they are telling me directly?
Assumption, man.
I think I understood your point about, not making generalizations about objective truths and such. But I think for me, I think there's something different to be said about universal values, because when I read the Quran, maybe I might read, notice interactions between God and his creation, and maybe creation between another creation. And they might promote certain universal values like maybe kindness, generosity, mercy. And this might be for, 99% of interactions. And so I can say, okay, well, this is something that objectively is encouraged and promoted within the book, and I should interpret the verses or whatever through that lens. And maybe even the 1% that does not seem to promote these values, maybe even those can be within that umbrella of mercy and kindness and generosity and that sort of a thing. So where does that fit into the discussion of objective truth and stuff like that?
You used very nice word, the universal. Like a universal reality, and how I take it as I'm serious. I think this is very nice word that we can use, unlike objective, because objective means like a completely different thing, which is if my wife was not here, I would use a very bad word. So universal means like you are in a classroom and there's a training there. There are certain things that everybody needs to know, right? Universal things, universal truths that every student should know, that 2 + 2 = 4, whatever. Universal things everybody needs. And there is also the personal on top of that. And sometimes professor comes and says, I think I know that you are a bright person, so let me teach you something else. Or Atik, I see you have some issues, so I will give you a, the special, I don't know, the 101 training, and I will teach you something that I don't teach others because you need this. You see? So there's this universal reality that we all need to know, all need to understand. And there is this personal reality that the creator just creates for us because I need it this way, so that I will be trained, right? And different people would need some different things. Some needs are universal. so shared. Some of them are private. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Please. Oh yeah, you have.
So, to summarize what I understood, we are interpreting Quran no matter what.
When you say we, people may
Humans.
misunderstand. Yeah, any human being,
any human,
scholar or not.
yeah. Prophet interpreted Quran because Quran is speech of Creator, so it is absolute in this sense. But this sun reflected on the mirror of the Prophet, we observed an interpretation. This sun of speech of Creator reflected on Imam Ghazali, we observed another interpretation and whatnot. So interpretation is inevitable. Everybody will interpret Quran. To think that it's not possible is, I'm going to take you to history. If you studied a little bit of Islamic history, maybe you have heard about Khawarij. What's the English word for Khawarij? Is there an English word for that? Divergence. Okay. So in the conflict between Imam Ali and Muawiyah, so Imam Ali said, we need to have referee to judge between us. In that occasion, a group of people said that, objecting Imam Ali, saying that, oh, you replaced word of God with word of man. Word of God should have been referee among us, not a third person. Sounds too pious, right? Referee, hakam, someone judge.
Mediator.
A mediator.
Oh, you know what referee, like you watching all these sports events and so on, right? There is a referee.
Okay. Oh, I see. Thank you. Yes.
And obviously your sport. It's not what we meant.
Okay. I'm writing this aside. Okay. So it sounds very pious. The guy, like those who are opposing Imam Ali, is saying that Quran should have been referee or the mediator or the judge. Why did you put a person to mediate between us? The same Imam Ali, when sending sending a person to envoy to Khawarij, he suggested they are going to ask you they will bring evidence to you from verses of Quran. He said, I am suggesting you to go to them with Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Because you can interpret Quran, whatever verse you take, it's going to be an interpretation. But you will pretend as if, no, this is what God says. No, my dear brother, it is what you understand from that verse. So the proper question is your understanding aligned with how the teacher, which is the Prophet ﷺ, understood it? Is it in line with his interpretation? This is the relevant question. The question is not, no, Quran's meaning is one and I'm going to go with that. This is nonsense. This is going against human nature.
Could you repeat who was telling this? Imam Ali, right? One of the most
like the door to knowledge.
Knowledgeable, the Sahaba. So, and he was saying that what you showing me is not Quran. It is your understanding.
Your microphone is muted, brother.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
So this being the case, and it's being like basic human circumstance that you will interpret Quran and any single human being will interpret Quran. The relevant question is, this being the case, how do I get a proper interpretation within my circumstances? This would be the relevant question. This is why the assumption of the initial question was wrong, as if there is a clear-cut, single, perfect interpretation of Quran. Like, this is against the definition of speech of God, first of all. Second of all, it's against the definition of human perception. We are not created as such. Realizing our case, our reality, then I will interpret, Burhan will interpret, Abir will interpret. But how can we try to achieve it or interpret it in a proper way? This should be our concern. This is where I would say, well, Quran was not revealed on top of a mountain. It was revealed to a human being for a reason. That person was trained how to interpret Quran in his circumstances. So we have an example. And not only that person himself, Prophet trained people around him, and they interpreted Quran in a way that they learned from Prophet ﷺ. And even there are nice examples, even for the most simple thing of how to recite Quran. So somebody was reciting Quran, and Umar hears it and gets angry. He holds the guy from like his hand and takes it to the Prophet. Says, read it, and says, I'm going to, I mean, in narrations is how they say, I'm going to chop off the head of this guy. He's reading Quran in a different way. He's corrupting Quran. Rasulullah says, okay, you read it. The guy reads the Quran. Now asks the Umar, you read it. Here is the Quran. Says, you both are correct. Quran is revealed on 7 different recitations. Even in the very basic thing of how to recite Quran, there's this different options provided in there, and Prophet ﷺ is exemplifying this to us. The same thing happened with right after Rasulullah ﷺ among Sahaba, as in the example of Imam Ali and Khawarij. This is why Sunnah, the practice of Prophet, in life, Quran is interpreted. So we are reducing it only to one meaning. This is our problem. Yes, there are verses in Quran which look mostly, I'm not again going to say 100%. I don't know how, but I think there should be further meanings into even those verses of Ahkam, but they are more likely, yes, appearing as more related to clear-cut rules. But even in that ruling, different scholars had different opinion, hence there had been those different madhahib and whatnot. Even when it comes to ahkam, there are different interpretations because there's room for that in the revelation. And if we were to go with what percent of Quran are those verses of ahkam, again, we are going to get a very small sum. Majority of Quran is not like that either. Yes, there are such examples, 5%, maybe, not even 10%. So now take the rest of the Quran. So the relevant question should be, where do I stand then? Then I should be looking for, in a proper way, how would I interpret Quran? Or how would I learn a proper interpretation of Quran becomes my issue. It's not that, oh, there has to exist a clear-cut, limited meaning and whatnot, which is not reality. So having this assumption will eventually can take me to become a Khawarij, which sounds very pious, but very far from the reality.
There are a few comments. Suhail says, going back to these laws, the ahkam ayahs, some people take these ahkam in a different ways. The rulings are different and so on. We discussed this. And then Zarar says, but as read, I added but part because it sounds like it's kind of objection to what Yusuf were saying. Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, told them they are wrong. He didn't say you are right, but I'm also right. He brought the dalil, the proof, to explain why their interpretation was wrong. So just because he used an Arabic word, I'm inclined to say that he's right. But beyond that, so Zarar, and in general, like when we talk about interpretation, and I can understand why, people directly jumped in the conclusion that as if Yusuf is suggesting, oh, whatever you interpret is fine. It's your interpretation. This is my interpretation. So we shouldn't think in a binary way. Whether you don't interpret, there's one meaning, or there's infinitely many meaning, everything is acceptable. This is not the idea. So the Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhum told them, what you are showing is not Quran, it is your understanding of Quran. So he was co-objecting their usul. I'm using Arabic. Their methodology, like how they approach Quran. This is wrong, he said. It was not about, your interpretation versus my interpretation and so on. That's one thing. The second, and definitely their interpretation was wrong, and Hazrat Ali's interpretation was right. This is also true. But it doesn't mean that that was the interpretation and the only interpretation. So yet there are boundaries, and that's what I think we've been speaking here. There are boundaries based on the Sunnah, because this is how we learn to read Quran anyway. Like even recitation of Quran, as Yusuf said, we learn from Sunnah, right? Even just the recitation is bounded by Sunnah. And the definition and the interpretation will definitely be bounded by Sunnah. But how we approach Sunnah, there are different mazhabs, there are different imams taking this Sunnah is right, that Sunnah is right, and so on and so forth. This is about the fundamentals. We're not discussing, what Sunnah is reliable, what Sunnah is not reliable, and so on and so forth. It is your responsibility. You will find your path, you will find your shuhur, you will find your scholars, and so on and so forth. But you have to know that when you listen to a scholar, whatever he is saying, whatever she is saying, it's her interpretation based on her definition of Quran. You have to accept that. Then, if you in line with this understanding, if you are in line with this definition of Quran, listen to her, listen to him. But you have to know that it is his understanding, her understanding. It's not Quran. It's his understanding of Quran. And most of the time when it comes to scholars, their understandings are much better than my understanding. Hence, I usually prefer to rely on them. Right? But I know that it is their interpretation. So when I see a difference in another scholar's book, I do not panic. Oh, what's happening? Quran must be one. No. The Quran is there. Two people understood it in a different way. And it has to be this way. I'm not surprised anymore. It has to be this way. There has to be some differences. Your question, the ahkam. Again, my daughter, she comes and I don't know, she's thirsty. She finds a glass of water there in this house without asking and anything and starts drinking. I go her and tell her, Bushra, we're not drinking other people's water without asking. This is the saying. Okay? This is the the sentence. What is this? It's a ahkam sentence, right? We do not drink other people's water without asking. This is ahkam. If Yusuf tells you that, but is it just ahkam or is it giving you even more? Because if you take it as an ahkam, just ahkam, what you get out of it? You cannot drink water without asking. This is the rule. If you take it as, oh, the father was trying to teach her something and giving water as an example. If she approached the same sentence this way, then she would say, oh, I cannot also eat baklava without asking. The rule was about just water. It was about just blood, pork. What else? That animal. So, I mean, isn't that simple? You cannot eat blood, you cannot eat pork, you cannot eat that animal. In another ayah, it says you cannot drink alcohol. It's so simple, right? And this understanding is true. The same way my daughter cannot drink water without asking. It is true. But there is more than that. My creator tells me you can eat this, but not that. You can drink this liquid, but not that liquid. That's also what I understood from the same ayah. And then same ayah says, I have the question, why? What is the point? Right? Why I cannot eat this, but can eat that? What is the difference between pork and chicken? And don't tell me that one is clean, one is, it's just stories, right? If I produce you a very clean pork, are you going to eat it? No, right? So I ask why, well, what is the point, and so on. And then I say, wait a second. Now the same ayah taught me I'm not the owner. It's not my house. I cannot set the rules, right? I'm not the owner. I cannot set the rules. I cannot say that I can drink whatever I want. I drink alcohol just little. It doesn't make me drunk. I don't say that. Why? I'm not the owner of my body. I'm not the owner of this liquid. I'm not the owner of the social norms or whatever. My creator says you cannot drink. Why? He said so. The same ayah. It became more than you cannot drink alcohol. So it doesn't mean what you read in the surface level is wrong. It is true, you cannot eat alcohol. We all agree on that, right? Do you also agree that the same ayah tells me you are not the owner of your body, you are not owner of these drinks and so on, you cannot decide yourself unless I allow you? The same ayah told me that one as well. Do we agree? So it's not just the ahkam. Why? Because it's coming from the best teacher. It's coming from the absolute source. I do not expect and I cannot accept that one ayah in Quran only means one thing. I cannot accept that. It's coming from the absolute creator. Every letter must have some other meanings as well. That's what I expect. Again, within my context, then I would gain more out of this ayah. But dua, for instance, she would say, no, I'm sorry. Okay, this is good, but I don't see any problem reading it as just the ayah of ahkam, she would say, and she would benefit. She wouldn't drink alcohol, and good for her. Just an example. Good for her. She's saved within her context. May Allah, accept her efforts, not drinking alcohol and so on and so forth. But within my context, I have to go ask these questions.
So again, to see the big picture, why are we discussing this in the first place? So for a primary school student, math consists of summation, multiplication, division, subtraction. This is math. If you start talking about integral, they would say, well, like,
you are making up, Daddy.
Yeah, either you're making it up or you're overcomplicating. What's the point of that and whatnot, right? And when you're talking to a math student, if, let's say, Sultan comes and starts discussing about integral, we will say, no, Sultan, be quiet. What you are saying would be wrong towards that child, because that child right now shouldn't be bothered with anything more than those 4 mathematical operations. Those extras would be wrong for the child right now because the child is not able to comprehend it. And the truth for the child is those 4 operations, right? Cool. But now we started this conversation with the question of people are studying evolution and whatnot. And then they said, look, after having long conversations about evolution, but again, the question came to the point that how about the creation story? Isn't it contradicting what we observe and whatnot? Now, this question is forcing us to get into integrals, because this question is no more, a person who is asking that question is aware that 4 mathematical operations is not enough for me to figure out mathematics. And now you are saying that, okay, let's open up a new understanding. It looks like you are ready to see more than those 4 basic operations. There's something called integrals. Let's get into that. So Qur'an, yes, so far we were reading it in a way, and it's true, those 4 mathematical operations do work well, but there would be some further limits of math where you will need to start talking about integrals and derivatives and whatnot. Now we are starting to talk about how do I then read the purpose of Qur'an, because it looks like just reading it as a story so far was sufficing me. But now it's contradicting certain things I observe. So how am I going to properly read it? This is why now we need to start taking responsibility. Because what Birkan says boils down to, I should take certain responsibility. So far, I was saying that I put all the responsibility on the shoulders of a sheikh or someone. And in the afterlife, I would say, well, it's all him. Go and burn him. I'm good, right? But now the question you're asking is forcing you to say that, well, your sheikh was not answering or addressing that question anyway so far. Now you are getting into an uncharted territory, for you at least. How are you going to figure that out? This is why now we are trying to unearth, and everybody in this room is mature enough to be able to understand that you know what, there was something we were hiding from you so far. Whatever comes out of human mouth is an interpretation of Quran. Therefore, now you need to start picking and choosing and putting effort to correctly picking and choosing which interpretation is more worthy to pay attention to. And in your new question, which was not asked before, people didn't ask maybe 100, 200 years ago whether story of creation was accurate, not accurate, was it talking about the evolution of human race or whatever. But now you do. So now you need to get into that territory. Hence, that conversation becomes important. Otherwise, what we are doing right now here is not to, well, let's philosophize and try to get something new. And if this is not benefiting, if this conversation is not benefiting us, either still we are at the primary school, that's fine. I mean, if it's not bothering us, that's good. Go with 4 fundamental multiplication, summation, and whatnot. But if those questions are relevant questions for your life, and then this is how we are starting to navigate towards the answer we are looking for. Hence, we need to get to know that every interpretation or every mention of a meaning from Quran is an interpretation. The relevant attitude is which interpretation is more worthy. It's not that, oh, that is the interpretation. Such a thing cannot be possible. So I think this is the big picture. Make sense?
It's 9:30 almost. So we have to close maybe with one final remark. Going back to the duas and Zara's questions, Zara was also asking in the comments when she said, like, there are all these different ways of understanding Quran, and do I have to choose one and so on? Or Zara saying, like, sometimes there are some ayahs I cannot read it the way you suggest, like it's speaking to me and so on. Is it always possible to so on and so forth? I guess the one question maybe is why the scholar that we are studying, Imam Nursi, he's suggesting that we should be reading Quran as this. as if it is reading to speaking to us. Why he is suggesting that don't read Qur'an as a historical text. Don't read Qur'an as only as ahkam. But even with the ahkam, get the ahkam, but even from the ahkam, again, not denying ahkam, get the ahkam, but even from there, take it as a starting point and go further. Why he is suggesting this specific way of reading Qur'an? And you have to define Qur'an this way and so on and so forth. There's a very practical, maybe historical, or anyway, practical reason for that. He saw within our age, in these, what is it called? Days and age. There is a phrase. In our, yes, day and age. The other type of, the other ways to approach Qur'an, he says, I mean, this is what I understand at least, or from his students. They worked for a certain period of time. Why? Because people at that time already had access to the fundamental understanding of the religion, fundamental teaching of the religion, the Qur'an, through their connection with the Prophet and so on and so forth, or the first a few generations of the students, they had the access to them, so it was already feeding them, let's say. And what they needed was just a reminder of the ahkam, for instance, just a reminder of what they already knew, and so on and so forth. But in our age, in our society, reading Quran in this way, he says, for the majority, it doesn't work. Very practical. It's not about this is wrong, this is right. No, it's not working anymore. Every young person exposed to all these different ideologies now, we are not protected by Sunnah anymore. We walk on the street and the first person we see will challenge our iman.
Can you refine what you mean by we're not protected by Sunnah, you said?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we prefer, we are very, far from it. Otherwise, Sunnah will protect us if we get into it. Don't get me wrong. Yes, thank you for clarification. We are so distant, detached from it. Everything we see on the billboards and so on will share our faith. This is our reality, right? I'm not protected from, let's say, the ugly images anymore in this society. I say, I'm on the right path. I take a step on the street. I see something, that I'm not supposed to see, and my nerves start, boiling. But this is our reality. He says we have to establish the fundamental belief in this age. Otherwise, we will get lost. We have to go back to Sunnah. We have to read Qur'an as it was taught by Prophet to the first generation of the Sahabas. How? Read it as if it is revealed to you. Read it as it is speaking to you. And build your iman in a strong way, in a way that it will not be shaken or with all these attacks. Otherwise, you cannot protect yourself, he says. So that's a very practical reason. So that's the reason I'm telling you that if it's working for you, alhamdulillah, you are good. But for most of the people, let's look at the reality. People is running away from what we call as religion. He says the only way to correct this is you have to approach Quran this way. You have to build your iman from scratch in the light of scholarly, the interpretations and so on and so forth.
And
So-
one very quick thing, isn't that a very utilitarian worldview though?
This was a mouthful.
Utilitarian worldview. I mean, get rid of this utilitarian part, put instead a very, let's say, pedagogical, practical, the way that I need, the way that I will be trained. That's how I understand. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين